Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. Judging by his statements, Donald Trump has made clear what his second presidency could mean for the rest of the world. But is he serious? And if he is, could we witness unprecedented destabilization, perhaps even turmoil? Joining me live from Washington, D.C. to explain how he views the situation is the director of the South Asia Institute at the Wilson Center, Michael Kugelman. Michael Kugelman, on the 20th, Donald Trump will be sworn in as the 47th President of the United States of America and start his second term as president. What impact do you expect him to have on the rest of the world?
Right. Well, I mean, we know from his first time as president that he is a maverick, and he is unlike what America has been used to with its presidents. And I think that we'll see that literally on day one during his inauguration. As you know, Trump has invited some foreign leaders to his inauguration. That's very unusual. Typically, presidents don't invite foreign leaders. Foreign ambassadors attend inaugurations. So, we might have, for example, the leader of Italy. We might have a senior advisor to China's President Xi. So that would get things off to a rather unconventional start. In terms of what's going to come, as you suggested earlier, it's always difficult to know how much of what Trump promises or pledges or threatens is actually going to play out. There's things that he promises that he doesn't follow up on. But I think if there's one thing that we could expect to see early on, relates to his what he describes as his America First policy, and I think in a foreign policy context, that certainly relates to tariffs, to trade. So I think that we could see some major shifts in U.S. trade policy, which certainly could impact India, which we could talk about. And the other thing that I would say here really amounts to a contradiction. Trump is someone that has said that he does not want the U.S. to get bogged down in wars and military adventurism. He wants to end wars. So I think that we could see a pitch from him to try to figure out a way to pitch the Ukrainians and the Russians to end the war there. A very ambitious thing to do. At the same time, this is why I'm talking about a contradiction. He's threatened military action in Iran, which could be very, very significant, and in my view, a very bad thing. So how these contradictory sentiments and messaging about U.S. military policy plays out in the early days of his administration, that'll be interesting to watch.
I'll come to each of the points you mentioned, Michael, one by one, and I'll add many more to those that you mentioned as well. But let me start by asking you this. Assuming they are confirmed, his Secretary of State will be Marco Rubio and his National Security Advisor, Michael Waltz. What's your assessment of these two men, and what sort of impact could they have moderating Trump's thinking and behavior?
Well, there are two, as foreign policy specialists, as national security specialists. These two are very well regarded, and of course, Waltz doesn't need to be confirmed. He'll be ready to go on day one. Rubio still needs to be confirmed by the Senate. He should have no problems getting confirmed. When I think of these two, I really think of them being really big hawks on China, and quite frankly, bigger hawks on China than Trump himself is. And I think that's the case with some of these other folks that Trump has picked for his cabinet. And that I think raises a very interesting question right off the bat. I think that Rubio and Walz are going to be ready to roll with really ramping up this competition with China. Trump himself, I think, will be ready to do that too. But I think that with Trump, you could see a bit of nuance in that regard. Trump is going to want to really intensify the economic competition with China to try to win it, so to speak. But he might be a bit less comfortable with the idea of pushing competition with China on the strategic and the military fronts because of what I had said earlier about him not wanting to get the U.S. in a position where it would have to worry about a possible conflict or military crisis with China. So we'll have to see how that plays out. He's known to bring people into his administration that don't agree with each other and at times don't agree with him on policy issues. So whether that'll translate to dysfunction and chaos or if that'll bring something better, that remains to be seen.
Now, someone who's very close to Trump is Elon Musk. He's provoked a lot of anger by his deliberate interference in European politics. The Financial Times yesterday reported that he's held talks to remove Keir Starmer as Britain's Prime Minister. We know that Elon Musk supports the AfD in Germany and he's called Chancellor Scholz a fool. Does he reflect Trump's thinking, or is he a loose cannon that's firing in every direction he wants?
I mean, so far what we've seen, I think that many of his policy views actually are in alignment with Trump, particularly his preference for a certain type of conservative far-right politician in Europe, as well as on some of these other hot-button discussions. As you know, there's been this ferocious debate playing out about visas, H-1B1 visas here in the U.S. And Musk and Trump have, at least in their recent messaging, suggested they're on the same page. They support, keeping this program in place. But I think that the issue with Musk and Trump, what's interesting is they seem to agree on the issues. But my understanding, and this is based on open press accounts in recent days, is that Trump might be a bit uneasy about how present Musk wants to be in so many deliberations and discussions that the U.S. is having. And I think that there's a possibility that these two men, might get into a bit of a tussle, and that they may have disagreements. It's still unclear as to what specific type of role Musk will play in the administration, other than co-chairing this whole Doge thing, which will not be a government agency. It's essentially going to be like an advisory firm to the U.S. Office of Budget and Management. So we'll see, but. It's again ironic because I think they agree on many policy issues, but I think Trump may be a bit uncomfortable about how present Musk wants to be in the administration and all the policy discussions going on in it.
So we could see a measure of tension developing between the two men, if Musk is in danger of treading on Trump's toes.
Right. Yeah, we'll see. And what we saw from the first Trump administration is that you did have a lot of turnover. A lot of people that were brought into the administration left it. But it is notable that I think in this case, with the next Trump administration, he seems to have picked people to be a part of his team that are known to be especially staunch loyalists. I think that he wants to reduce the likelihood that people could leave. But you can't guarantee that's not going to happen, especially when it comes to someone like Musk, where it seems that any potential dispute or disagreement would revolve less around policy issues and more around, what type of, sort of personality issues, what type of role Musk would want to play in the administration. So we'll see.
Let's come to the two big foreign policy challenges that Trump is going to face. He's boasted he can end the Russia Ukraine war in a day. How much of that is rhetoric? How much of that is real intention? And either way, is this bad news for President Zelensky?
Well, I mean, let's be clear, Trump cannot end that war in one day. But I do think that this will be an immediate foreign policy priority for him. I think that he wants to be seen as that leader that's able to figure out a way to wind down this terrible war. And I think the question here, and this also applies to his hopes of seeing the war in Gaza end, do the warring parties actually want to be receptive to a third party mediation? There's been some interesting noises from Zelensky in recent days where he suggests that he would be open to a Trump mediation, but I really don't know if Putin or Zelensky are ready to wind down this war. I think that Trump will want to try to start something. He might propose some type of summit between himself and Putin and Zelensky. He might try to pitch that early on during the first few weeks or the first few months of his term. But I think that the idea of ending the war in 1 day or 10 days is just not something that's realistic, quite frankly.
Now, in this connection, how do you see the future of NATO? Will Trump simply demand that NATO members pay more for their own defense? Or could he more fundamentally threaten the organization's unity, perhaps even its existence?
Yeah, I think that it's probably the NATO countries that are most concerned about the return of Trump of any set of countries in the world. And this is ironic because these are top US allies. But indeed, we saw when Trump was president the first time that you had significant tensions within the alliance because of his very unconventional views about alliance, thinking that, other NATO members should pay more to the alliance and so on. And so I think that there is a chance that those tensions can return. I mean, America First is all about this idea of what have you done for me lately? What have you done for the US? And I think from Trump's perspective, that entails US alliance partners paying up more, on very transactional levels to be a part of these alliances. And I think that here the Russia Ukraine factor weighs in more. I think that that could become an added tension point for the NATO alliance. I think that many NATO countries would be very uncomfortable about the idea of Trump coming in and trying to end the war because, quite frankly, they would have much more to lose than the US would if there were to be some type of failed peace deal, with Putin cheating on a peace deal and exploiting it to renew the war. That could have implications for the NATO countries, for geographic reasons that would not play out as directly for the United States. So I think that, I mean, from my view, one of Trump's biggest foreign policy challenges, and I'll have many, is to manage this NATO alliance and ensure that it doesn't fall apart. And again, he seems to be someone that is not as cautious about engaging with NATO allies as most other U.S. leaders are in terms of wanting to minimize tensions and problems.
Is this just impetuousness on Trump's part, or does he actually genuinely fail to understand how important NATO is to the West?
I'm sure that he understands, but I think that this relates to his bottom line views on things. I mean, he takes a very transactional view to so much, particularly when it comes to foreign policy. And he is, of course, a businessman, and he likes to think about any type of issue under the sun on a foreign policy front in terms of dollars. And so, I don't know if it's necessarily impetuousness. I guess one could describe it as a stubborn view, so to speak. But I think the question is, does he recognize that his very stubborn views about transactionalism and America first, if that could play out in ways that could impact US security interests? I think if the NATO alliance were to suffer a severe crisis, and if it were to be at risk of breaking apart, I would think that would be a major catastrophic security threat, not a security threat, but a security defeat, because you need that alliance to survive, particularly in the current era when you have Russia doing what it's doing and so many other things playing out. Again, we'll see. I suspect that Trump will want to ensure that the alliance does not fall apart and that he'll work through the tensions, but it certainly won't be easy, particularly with the baggage that's there from the NATO alliance relationship with the U.S. From the first time Trump was president.
Now, the other big international challenge that Trump will face and have to handle is Israel Gaza. Trump is a great supporter of Israel and of Benjamin Netanyahu in particular. In his first presidency, as you know, he moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He recognized Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights. Now, will all hell break loose if the hostages aren't released, as he himself has predicted a couple of days ago?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of interesting things here. First of all, he didn't say much about Israel or the war in Gaza when he was on the campaign trail. And basically, what he said boiled down to this idea of, well, we need to wrap things up quickly. That's, politically savvy. It's very ambiguous. What did he mean by that? Did he mean that he wants Israel to do everything possible to defeat Hamas so that the war could end? Or did he mean that, he wanted to come in and try to end the war through third-party mediation? We don't know. But indeed, as you say, he's very staunch supporter of Israel. I think he sees eye to eye with Netanyahu on a number of issues. And Netanyahu may have anticipated that. We might see Netanyahu even look to ramp up this offensive even more, as if it could be ramped up even more, assuming that Trump would be okay with that. But there's also other interesting factors. I think Trump knows that he won the election, he won re-election in part because of the votes of large numbers of Muslim American voters who are very unhappy about the Biden administration's policies toward Israel, the staunch support for Israel. So might that be something that impacts the way he goes about things? My sense, it's hard to know for sure. My sense is that initially he's going to want to see Netanyahu do whatever is possible to try to get to a point where Trump could come in and make a successful pitch for the war to end. But what that everything possible might mean could be very concerning if we're talking about ramping up the war even more than it's been ramped up. I do think that over the longer term, just like Trump wants to be seen as the leader that ends the war in Ukraine, he wants to be seen as the leader that ends the war in Gaza. But let's be very clear: Netanyahu is not going to want to end this war, no matter who tries to push him to end it, until he defeats Hamas, which is his goal. And obviously, that's not easy to do. It could take a very long time. So it's a big challenge. I think this is an even bigger challenge for Trump than ending the war in Ukraine would be. It's just not very easy in these cases. But my goodness, the war needs to end.
And I take it this is an area where Trump's provocative attitude towards Iran will simply complicate the situation considerably.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned Iran. I mean, Trump has taken very unconventional views toward traditional U.S. rivals and enemies. He of course had that meeting with the North Korean president. He's taken a much more restrained position toward Russia than previous recent leaders have. He's also indicated his admiration for President Xi of China, but he has been consistently hostile to Iran throughout and during he was president the first time. Very hawkish. The people that he's picked to join his cabinet, huge hawks on Iran. And yeah, I mean, and the fact that he's someone that indicates that he doesn't want to get bogged down in wars, but at the same time suggests that he'd be willing to contemplate airstrikes in Iran. It's obviously a contradiction, but I think it's also very concerning. And if he wants to end wars in the Middle East, well, the last thing you want to do is start a war with Iran. I think what might be more likely is that Trump might be someone that is supportive of any plans by Netanyahu and the Israeli government to step up military activities in Iran. I suspect that Trump would be very happy with the idea and principle of trying to eliminate Iran's nuclear weapons program. But I think that he might, at the end of the day, be open to something short of airstrikes on Iran. I like to think that would be a last case scenario. But again, if you're trying to end wars, launching airstrikes on Iran or encouraging Israel to do the same doesn't sound like a very wise policy.
Now, Michael Kugelman, whilst we're talking about the Middle East, what about Syria, where we saw a political earthquake last month when Bashar al-Assad was deposed and fled overnight to Moscow? The Biden administration did make a fledgling attempt to reach out to Damascus. Might Trump follow suit, or do you think Trump will be much more concerned about being on side with his friend Putin?
Yeah, I mean it's hard to say. I mean, very soon after these monumental events played out in Syria, Trump posted a very detailed message on social media in which he basically said that we don't want to be a part of this. The U.S. needs to stay out of this. We don't want to get bogged down in wars and instability and so on. And I thought that was very telling. I would also argue that the new leadership that has emerged in Syria are probably not the type of leaders that Trump would want to engage with, given his views about Islamism and militant Islamist terrorism and things like that. So I think that he would want to keep his distance, quite frankly, from this new leadership in Syria. But clearly, he's not ready to extricate the U.S. from the Middle East, given the close partnership that he'll want to have with Israel. There's concerns about Iran. He'll want to be sure to renew his close ties with the leaderships of the Arab Gulf states, particularly the Saudis. So, yeah, and if you want to do that, it's going to be hard to just ignore Syria, which is obviously going to continue to be a big issue because no one is expecting Syria to stabilize anytime soon.
So he could get caught between the contradictions of his different viewpoints.
Right, exactly.
There is a third international issue, but I'm not exactly sure how serious Trump is about it. He says he wants to buy Greenland. On other occasions, he says he's prepared to take it militarily if need be. He's even talked about taking back the Panama Canal. And most bizarrely of all, he's begun talking about absorbing or even annexing Canada. Does he really mean all of this, or is he simply allowing his imagination to run riot?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should take these types of things with some grains of salt, some healthy grains of salt. I think with Canada, as you know, there's soon going to be a change of government there. Trump does not care for Trudeau. Trudeau does not care for Trump, and if you likely could have a very different type of government in Canada soon, one that would be much more aligned with Trump's own thinking. If that happens, I think that you're going to see much less of this noise from Trump on this notion of Canada as the 51st state. Um, Greenland and Panama are interesting because I think they really reflect what I described earlier about Trump's purely transactional view toward the world, toward looking at the world. His views on the Panama Canal, right? His view is that the U.S. built it, and then it's not right that the U.S. should have to pay to use it. So why not just turn ownership back over to the U.S. to make things simpler? And with Greenland, I think that he sees some investment opportunities there with the raw minerals and the natural resources and all of that. I don't think that these are things that he's going to follow up on very seriously, though understandably, of course, leaders in Panama and Denmark and so on are concerned about these things. But I think that we shouldn't place too much emphasis on these particular issues. I think that these will likely recede to the sidelines once he's in office and focused on all the other issues, the more immediate issues that he's going to be dealing with, both abroad and at home.
Now, Trump has also, as you mentioned yourself a moment ago, talked about imposing a 20% tariff on all imports and far higher tariffs on Chinese exports. He's also threatened Canada and Mexico with 25% tariffs each. Presumably, most people say he'll move to do this pretty quickly. So, could we end up perilously close to some sort of trade war?
Yeah, I mean, we saw when he was president the first time that he was not afraid to take these steps, and he's made very clear that he thinks that some countries deserve higher tariffs, including India. And I think in the case of India, it's a top candidate from Trump's perspective because of the trade imbalance in India's favor, and because of the fact that India has tariffs in place that are not as high, quite frankly, as some key U.S. allies, like Japan, for example. South Korea have higher tariffs, but they're still high and too high for Trump to be comfortable with. So yeah, I think that there is a possibility for some new trade war, but then there's also the other side of things, right? I think that when it comes to China, Trump has professed his admiration for President Xi. I mean, I think he professes admiration for many of these strongmen type leaders, autocratic leaders, and so on. So, given how important personal chemistry and personal diplomacy is in international relations these days, might that prompt Trump to rethink some of his ideas on tariffs? I don't think so, quite frankly. But we'll see, and this is going to require some pretty difficult, sensitive diplomacy negotiations between the U.S. and the key likely targets of his tariffs, and that certainly applies to India. But there might be a silver lining here in the context of India. If India is worried about U.S. tariffs, if Trump is unhappy about India's tariffs, that might provide an incentive for the two sides to come together and talk about negotiating some type of new economic partnership accord that could bring down tariffs. So there might be an opportunity, but whether India and other countries with that view bring that to the attention of the Trump administration soon enough before Trump starts implementing all these tariffs, that's remains to be seen.
I'll come to India in a moment's time, but first, Michael Kugelman, let me ask you a question about the sort of relationship that Trump is looking for with China. I know that he's invited Xi Jinping to his inauguration, although I doubt very much whether the Chinese president will attend. But what sort of relationship do you think he envisages over the next 4 years with Beijing?
I mean, if you look back at his first administration, pardon me, the first few years, the early years of his first term, you didn't really have a deep, bitter competition between China. And, again, I mean, Trump was calling China a friend, and he saw China as a useful player vis-a-vis North Korea to try to ease tensions there. It was only later in his administration when the competition heated up. So I think he'll come into this second administration really ready to push the competition with China on the economic front. But beyond that, it's unclear. I mean, Biden and his administration had always said that they wanted to cooperate with China in areas where it made sense. And from the Biden administration's perspective, those areas that made sense were things like, climate change, public health, things like that. I'm not sure that would be the case with the Trump administration, but I do think that he would be open to engagement with the Chinese. I suspect that he would like to have a summit with President Xi fairly soon in his term, or at least the opportunity to engage with him. There will be opportunities for the two of them to meet pretty early in his administration, perhaps at a G20 summit later this year. So I think that remains to be seen. But with all the hawks in his administration, as I think I said earlier, a lot of these people he's picked to serve with him are more hawkish on China than he is. They're really going to be pushing him to really intensify this competition in a big way, which I think he will want to do on an economic front. But when it comes to these issues like China's provocations in the South China Sea, Taiwan Straits, how Trump would want to push back on that. We know that those working with him would want him to try to do whatever's possible to work with allies to counter those Chinese provocations. But I think that Trump himself might want to be careful. Again, wouldn't want to do anything that could risk some type of conflict with China. Would want to focus much more on the economic front, using U.S. government tools to push back against Chinese infrastructure investments, recognizing that China's BRI is experiencing a slowdown in momentum. That might provide an opportunity for Trump to try to push U.S. forms of infrastructure investments. I'm not sure what those would be, to try to push back against China. And again, that's trying to get a leg up on the economic competition with China. And that's something that Trump will definitely want to focus on.
Let's focus for a moment on India. Modi and Trump established a pretty close personal relationship during his first presidency, but Trump, as you know, can be unpredictable, he can be temperamental. He clearly hasn't invited Modi to his inauguration, and some people would say that's a bit of a sore point in New Delhi. What sort of relationship do you expect between the two of them now that the second presidency is about to start?
Well, I mean, as I said before, Trump and Modi are ideological bedfellows in the sense that they see eye to eye on many things, and that will definitely help. I think that Trump's views on China and strategic competition, that will help the U.S. India relationship for sure. I think you'll see a fair amount of continuity, quite frankly, between Biden and Trump on policy toward India, though I do think some of the priorities for the relationship could change in the Trump era, the second Trump era. Climate change, clean energy cooperation have become big parts of partnership in the Biden era. I don't think the Trump administration would want to prioritize those. Then, if you look at tech issues, which had become a big focus of partnership in the Biden era, that I think will be a big question. I think that'll continue. Trump will want to see tech cooperation continue with India, particularly so long as he understands that it's meant to advance strategic interest in terms of countering China and trying to ensure that India has more of a role in global supply chains, particularly with semiconductors. But when Trump was president the first time, he took pretty hardline views on export controls and all of his threats with tariffs. That's something that could pose challenges for tech cooperation. This is, I think, one reason why Jake Sullivan was there in New Delhi earlier this week. I think that he wanted to talk to his Indian counterparts to ensure that this tech cooperation, as embodied by the ISET, can be foolproof by any attempts by the Trump administration to try to push back on that. But I think, broadly speaking, the relationship should be okay. I think that Trump will not be as concerned about India's relationship with Russia as the Biden administration had been, at least initially. But I would say this is not going to be a problem-free relationship. I think the trade issue will loom the largest. I think concerns about tariffs will loom large. And I also think that the indictments, the murder for hire plot, as well as the indictment of Adani, that those are not going to go away. I think that some in New Delhi might think that Trump would sympathize with Modi's concerns about Sikh terrorism, or would want to maybe try to slow down that investigation. Maybe he would sympathize with Adani, a fellow businessman who's been very supportive of Trump. I don't think that's going to happen. I think these issues will continue to loom in the relationship. I think that Trump will want to use the Adani indictment as leverage, perhaps, to try to, push India toward taking certain policy steps that could serve U.S. interests, particularly when it comes to tariffs, and the Panoon issue, the alleged murder for hire plot. Yeah, I think that he's someone, because of his politics, of America First politics, he's going to take very seriously allegations that another country tried to carry out an assassination of an American citizen on U.S. soil. It would be a very clear violation of U.S. sovereignty. That is, America First is all about pushing back against that type of thing. So, long story short, I think these two indictments, which have been such a big focus of the relationship in the latter Biden years, I think that'll continue to play out, and will lead to some uncomfortable discussions for the two sides, at least early in the Trump era.
So, Indian expectations, or maybe I should say Indian hopes, that the two indictments will get a lower priority under Trump could be very mistaken.
Yeah, I think so, and particularly because there was a very notable appointment that Trump made to head the Civil and Human Rights office of the Department of Justice. As you know, Harmeet Dillon, who is a Sikh activist, and she has actually been very critical of the Biden administration for not going far enough to to push back on India for its alleged plot against Panoon. So that'll be interesting. You also have, of course, Kash Patel, who was picked by Trump to head the FBI. I think that Kash Patel would be, take a very different position, and I think he's someone that has professed support for Modi. I think I had said this earlier, that there's a tendency on Trump's part to bring people into his small circle, people that don't agree with each other. And that's certainly the case with these two individuals that I mentioned. But yeah, bottom line is, I do think that Trump will not try to slow down these investigations. I think that he'll step back and let them play out.
What about Quad? Biden took it to the heads of government level and gave it an enormous amount of importance. Will that continue under Trump?
Yeah, I think so. Just because of Trump's views about China, and I think that he's someone that really welcomes U.S. partnership with all of the Quad countries, not just India. Quite frankly, I think he's more comfortable with these countries than he is with the U.S. NATO alliance partners at this time. So I think that should be fine. I think that we should certainly expect Trump to be willing and open to travel to India later this year for the next Quad summit. I mean, he's someone that, as I understand it, doesn't like to travel abroad. But he did visit India, of course, when he was president the first time, and I think he'll be very keen to go there. And so, yeah, I think that the Quad should be a lot of continuity between Biden and Trump. And indeed, as you said, it was Trump himself that was willing to elevate it in importance, and I think that will continue moving forward.
Let's go back for a moment to what you were saying earlier about tariffs and the way Indian tariffs will be very much in Trump's sights. What would be your advice to the Indian government? You understand India better than most people in Washington do. What would be your advice to the Indian government to handle a rampant Trump on tariffs?
Well, first of all, that's very kind of you to say that. Yeah, I would go back to what I said before, that I think that New Delhi might have an opportunity, anticipating tensions over tariffs, to come to the new Trump administration and say, look, we know that you're concerned about our tariffs. We're concerned about what could be coming from your side. Why don't we talk about it? Why don't we sit down and discuss ways to ensure that these tariffs are not going to be issues, and that could entail looking not toward an FTA, which I think might be too ambitious, but looking towards some type of deal that falls short of an FTA, like an economic partnership accord. I suspect that Indian officials would be very receptive to that, and I would think that Trump administration officials would be as well. Even though the people that Trump has picked to be, at Commerce and Treasury, I think may not be ready so quickly to just do away with the idea of higher tariffs on countries like India. But I think that there would be receptivity, because everyone that Trump has picked to be a part of his cabinet, for the most part, are big proponents of partnership with India. I think most people would see the value of at least having a discussion with India. So I think if New Delhi makes that pitch to the Trump administration, it would be a good idea. I think they should do it early, because who knows what Trump could try to do with tariffs. But yeah, that would be my very modest suggestion, my modest proposal to the Modi government, is to try to make that pitch early on to the Trump administration about how it's time to have a discussion to preempt any possible headaches for the relationship related to tariffs and the impacts that could have on our economies.
Now, the other potential sticking point is the H-1B visa. During his first presidency, Trump called it very bad. He called it unfair. But this time, Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, and Sri Ramakrishnan have come out in strong support of H-1B visas. Indeed, Elon Musk has even said he could go to war over the issue. So when it comes to the H-1B visa, do you believe Trump 2 would be significantly different to Trump 1?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. It's hard to predict. All of Trump's public messaging on H-1B1 visas recently has indicated that he is supportive of this visa program, that he wants to maintain it. Now, one could argue that it might go against his America First idea, right? If he's all about providing as many jobs to Americans as possible, this visa program might undercut that idea. But yeah, I think that I'd like to think, particularly given others that will be joining his administration that support the program, I think that he will want to back it. He'll want to continue with it. But this is something that I think could have broader implications. I mean, if there are efforts to push back on this and to slow it down and to much less to wind it down, could have notable implications on tech cooperation between the US and India, could have broader implications for US-India relations, which I think is another reason to believe that Trump will, at the end, want to support this visa program and want to maintain it.
Finally, and this goes back to the way I introduced the interview today, do you believe, given everything that we've been discussing, the whole sweep of subjects that we've covered, that we could be staring at the face of greater international destabilization? Is Trump going to make the world less stable, more insecure?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, but all I would say now is that I think the world is more unstable and volatile than it was when he was president the first time. So I think the stakes are higher. I mean, one or two moves or decisions he makes that are viewed to be rash or destabilizing could, I think, have much greater and more troubling and destabilizing implications than things that he might have done during his first administration. The fact that we have two major wars raging, the fact that great power competition has become so much more intense than it was earlier, the fact that these really big existential global challenges like climate change are playing out more vividly, and he historically has taken a not friendly position toward the idea of working with allies and partners and rivals to counter climate change. That suggests to me that there's just more at stake, and that I think that we have to expect that there's less leeway, less breathing space, so to speak, if he were to take steps that go against the grain and could be perceived as destabilizing. But again, he's a man of many contradictions, as we've discussed. He said that he wants to end wars, but he's also suggested that he would be willing to engage in military action. Um, and he's professed a desire to work with close friends, but he's also has tried to pick fights with close friends, particularly the NATO allies. So we're just going to have to see how it all plays out. And go back to what I said earlier as well. Who he has working with him, those that have his ear, these are going to be very important people as well. Particularly if you have folks that aren't agreeing with each other. If there's differing perspectives and views, who's he going to side with? Is he going to side with the bigger hardliner or the moderate? We'll see. We don't know.
Michael Kugelman, thank you very much for the time you've given me, and thank you very much for your very revealing insights into the sort of President Trump could be and what it might mean for the rest of the world. Take care. Stay safe.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.